Okay everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about wire sculpture. I'm also going to talk about how to use aluminum foil with wire sculpture and how to use plaster if you want to also plaster to make your sculpture a little thicker or stronger. Okay, so to get started, I just want to show you some examples of some wire sculptures that don't have plaster on it. You can find lots of examples online if you just Google wire sculpture, which is what I did here. And since I don't have a lot of examples in real life, I'll just show you what came up just when I Googled that. And you can see lots of different examples of wire sculptures. Now, I just printed out one page. It would be up for you to if you're interested in just kind of doing a little research to get an iPad and do it yourself or a computer and just look at lots of examples. Now, some students like working with wire and the final product or the final piece is just a wire sculpture. Other students like to take it a few steps beyond that and add some aluminum foil and or plaster to their sculpture. So this is a work in progress. It's not a finished piece, but you can see how a student made a wire sculpture and then proceeded to add aluminum foil, and some spots have tape on them because I'm assuming they were going to plaster this after so you wouldn't see the tape. You can also see an example here of a sculpture that's made with wire and plaster and then painted, and you can see that some areas the artist just left the wire exposed, and some they put the plaster and the paint. You're going to have to figure out a way to get your sculpture to stand if that's important to you. So these little feet, they don't stand that well. You can get them to stand, but if you're interested in creating something out of wire and plaster, and it's a figure, for example, a good way to get around the issue of trying to get it to stand is to make a clay base. So this is just a clay slab cut out, and then the figure is hot glued on so it can have a little stand. And this is really important if you're doing something with small feet, because there's not a big surface area with feet. So for example, this is a big plaster sculpture. You want to try to get the feet to stand, so they have to be a little bit bigger than this. Like, this is not going to stand on its own. And even if I were to glue it, it would be pretty challenging because it is so small. So that's something you want to keep in mind to make the feet a little more exaggerated and big. If you want to work with the wire, you want to experiment a little bit first. So I don't want you to use the new spools to experiment with. You will find in the wire box with the examples some pieces that you can kind of look at and bend and sort of mess around with to experiment with. So these are some thicker pieces that you can do that with. The thick pieces, the thicker spool or the thicker wire is on a spool like this, and it says ask teacher before using. So if you're ready to get started on something, I want to know what the project is. So please ask me, and then you can use that. But if you just want to see how it feels, you can see this thick wire sculpture is much harder to bend than the thin stuff, which looks like this. So you see the difference. But it's also way stronger. So you have to decide, depending on what you're making, is it more important that it's strong, or is it more important that it's easy to bend? Now, I just started kind of the beginning of a figure here, but I would say if you want to make a figure, like head, arms, legs kind of thing, I would use the thinner wire sculpture. You can use this, but it's really hard to bend, and there are lots of turns and twists when you are making a figure. So I have an example here. It's just the beginning of an example, but it's nice. You can see how the student used the wire and then the aluminum underneath and the plaster. So it kind of shows you all the steps, this little work in progress. Now I'm going to show you really quickly how to make a figure. So I have one long piece of wire here. It's about from my fingertip if I measured it all the way to my shoulder. There's lots of ways to make a figure out of wire, but this is just one way that I showed my students because it can be kind of difficult. So what I want to show you is that you can do a little twist like this. It almost looks like just like a ribbon twisted. And this can be a torso shape and a leg shape. Now don't forget the feet, because the feet are very important. And you can kind of change it if you aren't happy with, you know, the length, but I definitely wouldn't do a lot of twisting and changing because it is hard to get it to straighten out once you bend it. It's hard to get it perfectly straight again. For the head and the arms, you want a piece that's a little more than half of what you had for the legs and the torso. And it's exactly the same technique where you make a little bow and you twist it. And then the trick is to kind of weave the head into the torso with the arms. So what I do is I sort of hold it like this and I bend the arm into the torso like that, and the same thing over here, and it's just a way that I can tightly attach it. Now you're going to need to use these needle nose pliers. They're really good for squeezing the wire when you need it to, you know, not be so wiggly. They're also really good to cut the wire. You're going to need to cut it. Let's say the arm is a little too long. You just put the wire all the way to the end here and give it a little squeeze, and it cuts really, really easily. So now I have kind of a simple figure here, and you can bend it into any shape you would like. Okay? Let's say you're ready to plaster, or you want to add some plaster to it. Things you need for plastering are, and I'll show you what I've got here. I have the mask out just because it's easy. It's an easy example to show you. This is just I call it a messy board. It's different than messy paper. Messy board is just for plaster because this white dust gets everywhere. So you don't want to use it for anything else. And it lives in the plaster cabinet with the plaster materials. You're going to want some cut pieces of plaster. There's usually some pre-cut, but if you need it, I can show you how to cut it. You're also going to need a container, probably a bucket of warm water. Now, before I show you the mask, which is really simple, I want to go back to the wire sculpture. I haven't shown you any of the aluminum foil, so I do just want to show you this really quickly. For the aluminum foil, I would say tearing thin pieces is your best bet. And what I do to attach it is I go all the way to the edge and kind of wrap it around. You don't usually want too much aluminum foil because you're just trying to add a little bit of thickness to your sculpture, unless you want it really thick. But for these examples that I'm showing you, they're not. You want to keep it pretty thin because remember, you're putting aluminum foil and then you're also going to be using the plaster over it, presumably. And once you do another layer of plaster, it gets pretty thick quickly. So I am going to show you how to do the plaster right now in case this is how you want to do it. You might want to do for the arms and legs. I'm just going to kind of thicken up where I want the hand to be. And then for the plaster, you take your strip with your warm water, it cannot be cold. You dip it in the water, you let it drip, it gets soft. You don't want it to be really wet, so let it drip off. And then you want to take your sculpture and carefully wrap that plaster around. Now, once it dries, you cannot move your wire sculpture. The plaster will be hard underneath, or the plaster will be hard on top, so you can't bend the wire. So you want to make sure that your wire is in the exact position you want it when you put the plaster on. Okay, so this is how you would do it over aluminum foil. Let's say you want to add plaster onto a mask. Take your generic mask form. You'll see it pops right off. I just did a few strips a while ago, so it's totally dry. But same thing, you dip, you let the water drip so it's not soaking wet, and then you put it over your form. It's very important that you smooth out any of those bumps. See the little holes here? You want to smooth it out and put at least 2 layers if you're doing a mask, okay, on that generic form. Now for the masks, you are going to want to add some 3-dimensional elements. I showed this already, but you can see once the generic form is dried, you can tape on extra pieces. And I kind of pre-bent this so it would be bent in the shape that I want. And then you can paint it. I added a little glitter here, whatever you want to do. But it needs to have some 3-dimensional elements, and you need to check in with me before you do a mask. All right, I gave you a lot of information. If you have any questions, let me know. Good luck.